My dad demanded I give the inherited house to my brother after Grandpa's funeral. What he did next forced me to teach him a lesson. After the funeral of the only man who ever truly saw me, I found myself thrust into a battle over legacy, lies, and blood. As secrets unraveled and loyalties fractured, I learned that family isn't always who shares your DNA. It's who shows up when everyone else disappears. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Drop a comment below. What's the most shocking betrayal you've ever witnessed? Share your thoughts with our community. The day we buried my grandfather, the Alabama sky hung heavy like wet cotton, pressing down on everyone gathered at Greenwood Cemetery. I stood beside his mahogany casket in my black dress, the one Grandpa Joe had complimented just last Christmas, saying it made my eyes look like emeralds. People I barely recognized shuffled past, offering hollow condolences and awkward handshakes. They treated me like I might shatter, like grief was something fragile instead of the steel rod currently keeping my spine straight. Grandpa Joe had been everything to me. While my father, Marcus, spent his evenings buried in ESPN and Budweiser, and my mother had checked out emotionally years before the cancer finally took her, Grandpa Joe actually listened when I spoke. He was the one who taught me to change a tire, to make his famous cornbread, and to stand up for myself even when my voice shook. My brother, Derek, had always been the golden child, star quarterback in high school, business degree from Auburn, the whole package. But he'd never had time for an old man's stories or Sunday afternoon fishing trips. That was fine by me. Those moments belonged to us anyway. After the service, the humid air clung to my skin like regret. People clustered around the church fellowship hall, balancing paper plates of casseroles and sweet tea, their voices a low hum of practiced sympathy. I was picking at a piece of Mrs. Henderson's pound cake when I felt him approach, my father, Marcus, his cologne mixing unpleasantly with the scent of funeral flowers. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying that fake gentleness he used when he wanted something. "We need to talk." He didn't wait for my response, just placed his hand on my elbow and guided me toward the empty Sunday school room down the hall. The walls were covered with children's drawings of Noah's Ark and smiling suns, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his eyes. "Your grandfather left you the house," he said without preamble. That was unexpected. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Grandpa Joe's lawyer had called me yesterday with the news. The old farmhouse on Maple Street, with its wraparound porch and pecan trees, was mine. "Here's the thing, sweetheart," Marcus continued, his tone turning sharp. "Derek's got kids now. He needs that space more than you do." The words hit me like ice water. "Excuse me," my voice came out smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. Marcus stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over me. At 6'3", he'd always used his size to intimidate, and old habits die hard. "You're 25, Emma. Single, living in that tiny apartment downtown. Derek's got Madison and the twins to think about. That house has 4 bedrooms and a big backyard. It just makes sense." "Dad," Grandpa Joe left it to me for a reason. My hands trembled slightly as I spoke. "If he wanted Derek to have it." "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly at the end," he interrupted, his mask slipping to reveal something colder underneath. "All those medications, the dementia episodes. We both know he would have wanted what's best for the family." I stared at him, this man who was supposed to protect me, supposed to have my back. Instead, he was asking me to hand over the only thing Grandpa Joe had ever been able to give me. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. Marcus's expression hardened. "Don't take too long, Emma. Some decisions can't be undone once the truth comes out." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. Not sadness or disappointment, but a threat wrapped in paternal concern. He left me standing there among the crayon drawings, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The phone calls started the next morning. "Hey, baby girl," Derek's voice was syrupy sweet through the receiver. "Dad told me about the house. I know this is hard for you, but I was thinking, maybe we could work something out. Madison's been dreaming of a big kitchen for years, and the twins would love that backyard." I hung up without responding. The second call came 2 hours later. This time it was Madison herself, Derek's wife, her voice thick with fake tears. "Emma, I hope you'll consider what's best for the children. They barely knew great-grandpa, but they deserve to have his legacy too. It's not fair to keep it all to yourself." "Keep it all to myself." I'd been the one visiting every Sunday, bringing groceries, helping with doctor's appointments. Where had they been when Grandpa Joe fell and couldn't get up? Where were they during the chemo treatments? By the end of the week, the gentle persuasion had morphed into something uglier. "You're being selfish, Emma," Marcus said during his third call that day. "Family takes care of family. Your grandfather would be ashamed." That's when I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for the certified envelope with shaking hands, already knowing what it contained. Marcus was suing me, his own daughter. I sat at my kitchen table, the tiny one in my studio apartment that Derek thought was so inadequate, and read through the documents with growing disbelief. The claim was breathtaking in its audacity. According to the lawsuit, I had no legal right to inherit Grandpa Joe's house because I wasn't actually his biological granddaughter. The papers alleged that during my parents' marriage, my mother had had an affair. I was the result of that affair, making me no blood relation to Joseph Mitchell at all. Therefore, the house should rightfully go to Derek, Grandpa Joe's only true descendant. I read it twice before the words sank in. Then I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, so desperate, that hysteria seemed like the only reasonable response. They thought this would work. They thought they could steal my inheritance by claiming I wasn't really family. But they'd made one crucial mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found what I was looking for, a picture from last Christmas. Grandpa Joe and I were sitting by his fireplace, both holding matching mugs of hot chocolate. His eyes were bright and clear, completely lucid. "I need to tell you something, sweetheart," he'd said that day. Something important. At the time, I'd thought he was just being sentimental. Old people often got that way around the holidays. But now, remembering his exact words, I realized he'd been preparing me for this moment. I called the one person I knew I could trust, my grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who'd handled his affairs for 30 years. "Emma, I'm so sorry you're going through this," he said when I explained the situation. "But there's something you need to know. Your grandfather left specific instructions about what to do if your family contested the will." "What kind of instructions?" "He made a video, honey. Recorded it about 6 months before he passed. Said he had a feeling this might happen and wanted to make sure you'd be protected." My heart stopped. A video? He also had some documentation prepared. "I think you'd better come to my office. There are things your grandfather wanted you to know." As I hung up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear or sadness, but a cold, determined calm. "Game on, Dad." Jake's whole attitude changed overnight. The sweet, supportive husband disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. He stopped bringing me coffee in the morning, something he'd done almost every day of our 3-year marriage. He stopped asking about my day when I came home from my job at the marketing firm. The compliments about how strong I was and how much I deserved the inheritance completely dried up. Jake started sleeping in our spare bedroom, claiming he wanted to give me space to process my grief. But I knew the truth. Jake was angry that I wouldn't let him spend my father's money. The silence in our apartment became suffocating. We'd go entire evenings without speaking, both pretending to be absorbed in our phones or the TV. When we did interact, it was purely functional. "Did you pay the electric bill?" or "We're out of milk." Jake stopped doing the little things that had made our marriage work. He left dirty dishes in the sink, knowing I'd eventually wash them. He forgot to take out the trash on collection day. He started working late more often, claiming his marketing campaigns needed extra attention. But I caught him researching divorce lawyers on his laptop one evening when he thought I was asleep. I had no idea that his anger was building into something that would turn both our lives upside down. The tension became unbearable. I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid that any mention of the inheritance would trigger another cold shoulder treatment. I started eating dinner alone, reading Dad's old novels to fill the silence. One night, I called my best friend Sarah to vent about the situation. "He's acting like I personally stole money from him," I told her. "Like I'm selfish for not wanting to blow through Dad's life savings on luxury cars and beach houses." "Jess," Sarah said gently, "have you considered that maybe Jake is showing you who he really is? Your dad never liked him, did he?" The words hit me like a slap. Dad had tried to warn me, hadn't he? All those concerned looks and careful questions. All those times he'd gone quiet when Jake talked about money. He'd seen something I couldn't see. "Maybe it's time you started seeing it too," Sarah whispered. But I wasn't ready to admit that my 3-year marriage had been built on quicksand. I still hoped Jake would come to his senses and remember that he'd married me, not my bank account. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The explosion came exactly 1 month after we'd learned about the inheritance. Jake walked into the kitchen where I was making spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite meal, which I'd prepared as a peace offering, and dropped his bombshell without warning. "I think we should separate," he said flatly. I set down my wooden spoon and turned to face him. His expression was cold, like he was talking to a stranger instead of his wife of 3 years. "Separate," I repeated, certain I'd misheard him. "This isn't working anymore, Jess. We want different things. You've changed since your father died." I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. "Jake, you've been treating me like an ATM for the past month. That's not fair," he snapped, his face flushing red. "I was trying to help us build a better life together, but you're too selfish to share anything. You're hoarding that money like some kind of dragon." Selfish? Now I was getting angry. My father just died, and all you can think about is spending his money. He worked his entire life to save that money, and you want to blow it on cars and vacations. "Well, maybe if we divorce, we'll both be happier," he said with a shrug, like he was discussing what to watch on Netflix. I stared at him for a long moment. The man I'd defended to my father, the man I'd chosen over family dinners and holidays, was exactly who Dad thought he was. And I'd never once listened to him. That realization shattered my heart into a million pieces. But then something else clicked into place, a memory of Mr. Thompson's office and a folder of documents I'd barely glanced at during my grief. "Okay," I said calmly, "but there's something you should know first." Jake's eyebrows shot up. He'd expected me to beg or cry or fight for our marriage. He'd probably practiced this conversation in his head, imagining me as the desperate wife clinging to a man who didn't want her anymore. "What?" he asked suspiciously. I walked to our home office and pulled out the folder from our fireproof safe. It contained all the documents from Dad's lawyer that I'd been too overwhelmed to read carefully. Now I understood why Mr. Thompson had insisted I review everything thoroughly. I returned to the kitchen and slid the folder across the counter to Jake. "Go ahead," I said. "Read the highlighted section on page 15. Jake opened the folder with the confidence of someone who thought he held all the cards. His face went from smug to confused to pale as he read the words aloud. "If my daughter Jessica is married at the time of my passing, she will not receive access to any portion of her inheritance unless and until she is legally divorced. No spouse or third party may claim or access any portion of my estate under any circumstances." The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of pasta water on the stove. "You mean," Jake's voice cracked slightly, "if we divorce, you get the money?" "Every single penny," I confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "But if we stayed married, neither of us would see a dime. The entire inheritance would go to the American Heart Association instead." Jake stared at the legal document like it had personally betrayed him. His hands were actually shaking as he reread the highlighted section. "Your father planned this," he whispered. "He knew. He sure did. 2 years ago, actually. Right around the time you started asking him for loans to fund your brilliant business ideas, remember?" Jake's face went from pale to red to pale again. We both knew exactly what I was talking about. The time he'd approached Dad about investing in his buddy's food truck. The time he'd asked Dad to co-sign a loan for his cryptocurrency mining equipment. The time he'd suggested Dad help us with a down payment on a bigger place. Dad had politely declined each request, but I could see now that he'd been taking notes, building a profile of the man I'd married. She'd been studying him like a chess master, planning moves in advance. He trapped me," Jake stammered. "He protected me," I corrected. "There's a difference." Jake slumped into one of our kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. "But I already talked to a lawyer. He said spouses are entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. Not inheritance money received with conditions," I explained, feeling oddly calm. Dad's lawyer made sure of that. He researched Tennessee divorce law thoroughly before he wrote this clause. "So if I divorce you, I get nothing." "Nothing," I confirmed. "And if I divorce you, you get everything your dad intended you to have." Jake looked up at me with desperate eyes. "Jess, please. I'm sorry. I was just excited about the possibilities. I didn't mean to. We don't have to get divorced. We can work this out." But it was too late. I'd seen who he really was when he thought money was involved. I'd watched him calculate our relationship like a business transaction. I'd felt him withdraw his love the moment I didn't give him access to my inheritance. "No, Jake," I said quietly. "We can't work this out, because you just proved that you married me for what you thought you could get from me, not for who I am." "That's not true, isn't it? You were ready to leave me 5 minutes ago." The only thing that changed was learning about Dad's conditions. Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. We both knew I was right. Dad had seen this moment coming from miles away, and he'd made sure I'd be protected when it arrived.
The silence was deafening at first. After months of constant harassment, the quiet felt almost suspicious. But as weeks passed, I realized it was really over. They'd finally accepted defeat. The damage had been done, though. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Richardson, who helped me process 37 years of gaslighting, emotional abuse, and misplaced loyalty. I finally let myself grieve, not just for Grandpa Joe, but for the childhood I never really had, for the love I'd spent decades trying to earn but was never freely given. I grieved the fantasy of family I'd clung to for too long. Then I started to rebuild. I moved into Grandpa Joe's house full-time and renovated it top to bottom. I planted a vegetable garden and learned to make his famous chili recipe. I hosted dinner parties with friends who felt more like family than my blood relatives ever had. I donated $50,000 to Big Brothers Big Sisters, supporting kids aging out of toxic homes. I started my own freelance graphic design business, something I dreamed about for years but never believed I could do. 6 months later, my cousin Michelle called with family gossip. Bob had to sell his truck and take a job at Walmart. Jake's lawn care business folded, and his wife left him. Linda was renting out rooms in their house to make ends meet. They were still telling anyone who'd listen that I'd stolen what was rightfully theirs, that I was greedy and heartless. But I'd made peace with it. Because the truth was, I hadn't just inherited money. I'd inherited something far more valuable, freedom. The freedom to choose my peace over their chaos. The freedom to say no. The freedom to walk away and never look back. And that, more than anything else, was what they'd never forgive me for. But I was finally okay with being unforgiven. I was finally okay with being free.